This episode is brought to you by the Educator Hub at the Neurodiversity University. It's a place for teachers, administrators, parents, and more to gather and learn how to better support neurodivergent students and all students so that everyone has an equal chance at a fulfilling education.
If somebody gave me a gift and I said thank you, but I was only halfway thinking about it, I might think, oh, that wasn't really a good thank you. I should say it again. To use ERP, I would write a story where I don't say thank you, and then I just experience the feeling of anxiety. Or I might do a real exposure and have somebody give me something and not say thank you.
Do you ever hear people throw around the term OCD just because someone likes things neat? Well, obsessive compulsive disorder is way more than that. We're talking about intrusive thoughts and the compulsions that follow. How does it show up in people's lives? And how does it connect with other types of neurodivergence? Today, we're chatting with Jessica Whipple, the author of I Think a Lot. She's going to share her own experiences with OCD and how her book can help kids who worry a lot. That's all coming up on episode 227. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity?
You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity
Podcast.
I know a lot of educators were interested in the Neurodiversity University Educator Hub, but hesitated to sign up during the school year because there are just so many things to try to juggle during the school year. So we decided to open the doors so that you can join for the summer months. You can take a closer look at the community and binge all of the collected resources that we have developed and archived. You can dive into the resources, watch our videos, and connect with fellow educators in meaningful discussions about how to support neurodivergent kids. Just a heads up, registration closes on Sunday night at 11:59 p.m. Pacific, so don't miss out. Head on over to neurodiversity.university and click on the Educator Hub tab to learn more, or you can find a link in the show notes. Okay, Jessica Whipple is here in a minute.
When I found the Neurodiversity podcast, I was really kind of
desperate to learn about myself and understand myself.
Honestly, I wanted to find like a
tribe who I could relate to and feel like I fit in.
This podcast brings on guests who seem to be moving neurodiversity more
into the mainstream. And Emily Kircher-Morris is amazing.
I feel like she's talking straight to me.
Her knowledge about people who think differently is so refreshing. Everyone's different.
And the world needs to
understand them. And that's what the Neurodiversity
podcast is doing.
Helping them understand
us.
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 Today, Jessica Whipple is my guest. Jessica is the author of the picture book, I Think a Lot, which offers insight to kids who experience obsessive compulsive thinking patterns. So, Jessica, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to start off just real quickly from a mental health perspective and lay a bit of groundwork for our listeners today about obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. A lot of people use the term OCD in a very colloquial and informal way to refer to someone who likes to be organized, but really we're talking about much more than that. Obsessive compulsive disorder is characterized basically by two main traits. The first is obsessive thinking, so a thought that is often called an intrusive thought because it's both distressing and unwanted, and that circles in someone's mind and takes their focus from other things, and then that's usually followed by a compulsion or a behavior that they have to do in order to get relief from that thought. So often that behavior might become ritualistic. It might need to be done in the same way every time. And while this might look like someone who is extremely stressed, if something in their environment is out of order, it can look like a lot of other things too. So one common manifestation of OCD is associated with contamination. So the obsessive thought that might be, I touch something with germs, and so the compulsive behavior is that they have to wash their hands. Or sometimes the obsessive thought can be a topic that is taboo, like sometimes the thought is about hurting other people or even themselves. And the compulsive behavior could be to count backwards from 10 without breathing, or to check with someone to make sure they're okay. And then there's also what's called just right OCD, which can look a lot like perfectionism, where someone redoes something over and over again until it feels like it is just right. So, these obsessive compulsive thinking patterns can be episodic. They might come and go with support and with treatment, and other times they can definitely be more pervasive in someone's life. It can also be a trait that is closely tied to other types of neurodivergence, like autism, for example. So, Jessica, with all that being said, part of what inspired you to do the work that you do and to write this book is some of your own experiences with obsessive compulsive thinking patterns. And I was hoping that you would share a few of your personal experiences with OCD and how that has impacted your life over time.
Sure. So I was diagnosed with OCD and major depressive disorder when I was 13. Over the years, it has changed themes. You mentioned hand washing. That has never really been one of the themes that I've struggled with, but there's other ways to be contaminated.
Mm-hmm.
There's, do I have an illness? And let's perform compulsions to try to make sure I don't have it or to make sure nobody else gets it. So over the years, the themes change just based on where I am in my life. My compulsions are mostly internal. So sometimes you hear that called pure obsessional.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes my compulsions are external, though, checking. So I might ask somebody, do you think this could happen? Or do you think I'm bad? Or something, whatever the worry is, I'll ask for reassurance. And asking for reassurance can be a compulsion as well. So in the book, if you're familiar with OCD, you'll notice some of the compulsions that the girl kind of goes through and experiences.
I'm curious what it was like for you being diagnosed at a pretty young age. What was life like for you before that? Like, was this something that you had been experiencing for a long amount of time prior to that diagnosis?
It wasn't. It came on very suddenly, and it was really out of character for me. My parents noticed that I was just not really talking and was in my head a lot and had been at a friend's party. And they thought something had happened at the party. And no, nothing happened at the party. That's just when it decided to start. And I was worried about a few things at the time. And in my family, mental health is something that we talk about, and it's sort of part of who we are. And so I was okay suggesting that I see a therapist to try to figure it out. OCD treatment was different then. And I feel like each time I have a severe setback, I realize that there's more that has been learned since my previous episode. So, we're always learning more. Back then it was sudden and troubling for all of us.
That's not uncommon for OCD, especially like in those adolescent years, to kind of be the time when that surfaces. Had you ever felt a lot of anxiety prior to that, or was this really something that was not preceded by anything in that way?
I was a careful child, and I definitely worried. I did think about these themes, but never to the point where it was interfering with my life. So It was out of character in its intensity, but I mean, I was a shy kid. I thought a lot.
Yes.
I worried about things. I was very cautious. People would say, just do something bad.
I'm assuming that was the adults in your life who were maybe encouraging you? No. I feel like sometimes adults do that, though, with kids who are overly cautious. They're like, just do, and in a
yes, in a safe way,
contained environment. But also it's, there are kids who are just very cautious.
Yeah, I was very cautious and very compliant and, typical first/only child.
Yeah. So I am curious. Tell me a little bit about how that treatment has changed over the years for you.
Well, as a child, it was mostly CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. But over the years, as CBT sort of became a compulsion itself to talk through my worries and make sure that I was thinking rationally about them, it became clear that I needed to do some ERP, exposure and response prevention, because it's kind of like the help started to become a crutch. And I had to bring out the the big machines to try to get control over, what I was feeling and where my thoughts were going.
Yeah.
And not control in a don't let yourself think that thought, but a control in, what am I going to do about it? I can experience this thought and that's okay.
Yeah. Explain a little bit about what ERP is for folks because they may not be familiar with that.
Sure. This is a treatment that I have done as an adult. I have not done it as a child. I'm not even sure if they really use it with children. It's in short, it's exposing yourself to the fear and desensitizing yourself to the physical reactions. And that's very scary. So in treatment, I have made a hierarchy of fears from least to greatest. And you start at the bottom and you gradually expose yourself to that fear in different ways. And you can do exposures in your mind if it's a fear that's very unlikely to happen. So you can write a story and read it over and over again and feel your anxiety peak. But then, the way we're made is that the more times we're exposed to stimulus that is painful, we desensitize to it. So that's the thinking behind exposure and response prevention. You're exposing yourself to the stimulus that creates the anxiety reaction, and you're preventing the response. So you're trying to prevent the compulsion.
Yeah.
And I guess to use one of the examples that was common for me, and I talk about in the book, the am I a bad person fear. If somebody gave me a gift and I said thank you, but I was only halfway thinking about it, I might think, oh, that wasn't really a good thank you. I should say it again. Or maybe I didn't sound like I was glad, so I should say it again. If I were tackling that fear, am I a bad person? Or what if I'm a bad person? Then to use ERP, I would write a story where I don't say thank you. And then I just experience the feeling of anxiety. Or I might do a real exposure and have somebody give me something and not say thank you and resist the compulsion to say it once or say it twice or however many times.
Yeah, I for what it's worth, I have used this with kids in my office in various forms. And so one example was, this was more a phobia than like an OCD type thing specifically, but it was a kiddo who had really, really terrible allergies and desperately wanted to get allergy shots in order to help minimize those because the medications just weren't doing enough, but was also deathly afraid of any sort of shot. And so one of the things we did was kind of in the same way. That you're exactly right. It's like you kind of make that hierarchy. And so we did this, and we started out even just by looking at cartoon pictures of syringes and then cartoon pictures of a person getting a shot. And then we kind of moved to, more realistic photos. And then we looked at videos, and we wrote out a script, like a visualization script to kind of desensitize to this. And then he actually his parents contacted the doctor's office, and he was able to just practice going into the doctor's office. And then he was able to watch his mom get a flu shot. And then, and eventually he did this. And he was able to do it. But it was a long process.
Yeah.
But it is effective. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to do it. But it's recognizing that you can sit with that discomfort, that you can get through that discomfort, and then you can make another choice. Like, you don't have to do that checking. I'll give one other example similar to what you were saying about like not saying thank you when somebody would give a gift. This was more of an OCD type of characteristic, but I had, this has happened a couple times with clients who get very obsessive about their schoolwork, go over it and over it and over it and over it. And so then the task would be to desensitize. It's like, I want you to turn in your homework. I want you to either intentionally get one wrong or leave it blank. Mm-hmm. And just to kind of be able to experience that. And so, which is always interesting when you try to talk to parents and teachers sometimes. Yeah. I'm like, no, trust me, this is a better value than those couple of points. And part of the experience for that is realizing that those few points aren't going to make that big a difference in the long run. And once you realize that and experience it, it then also makes it a little bit safer to have that, worry, but like, okay, it'll be okay if it happens.
There's such an explosion of risk. Like, a small risk seems very big.
Yeah, it does. And to those who aren't experiencing that really intense fear, it can seem like, why are you worried about that? That's not that big a deal. I think one of the ways that it manifests quite often that adults notice it, especially like what you were mentioning, is when it's the checking. I have kids, it's like, and they have to check over and over and over about being a good person, or, does somebody think something about them? And that might be something that they might notice. Are there other things that, as far as you know, that people maybe should watch for that might be signs that someone is dealing with some of these characteristics or traits?
I can't really answer that from a clinical place, but and you hear me giving a disclaimer there. That's one of my things there. But I think for me, what my parents noticed was just me sort of going, like, sinking into myself and not interacting. And that was the depression. That was the feeling dissociated from my life that, I was truly supposed to be living, in favor of wanting to control what was going on in my mind. So definitely, I think looking for times when the child sort of recedes. With my own daughters, I try to ask questions like, what are you thinking? And if they're expressive, hopefully a parent will get an answer. But
yeah, it's hard.
I don't get very many.
Yeah, I know.
More in a minute.
Since we launched the Neurodiversity University Educator Hub, there have been so many amazing conversations and ideas that have been shared. I absolutely love how we are all learning from each other when we're able to meet, and everyone can share how they create neurodiversity-affirming spaces at their schools. I know a lot of educators were interested but hesitated to sign up during the school year because there are just so many things to try to juggle. So we decided to open the doors so that you can join for the summer months. You can take a closer look at the community and binge all of the collected resources that we have developed and archived. You can dive into the resources, watch our videos, and connect with fellow educators in meaningful discussions about how to support neurodivergent kids. Registration closes on Sunday night at 11:59 p.m. Pacific, so don't miss out. Head on over to neurodiversity.university and click on the Educator Hub tab to learn more, or you can find a link in the show notes. I think that your book, I think a lot, it can also just be good for kids who worry a lot in general, even though they might not officially show signs of that obsessive compulsive thinking. How do you think that your book might help just a broader group of kids?
I guess I'll talk about the comparison aspect. When I was querying this book, querying agents to hopefully represent me for this book, some said that they didn't like the comparison aspect because it felt to them like we were telling kids it's okay to compare. But I feel like we should be telling kids it's okay to compare ourselves to each other. It's automatic. It's how we kind of find our place.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean when you're talking about the comparing?
Yes. So in the book, there's a girl character who looks around and notices the way she thinks about things. When she's painting, she's really careful. She's making sure she's got everything put together before she starts a project. She's looking at kids who are eating treats and asking for seconds and not saying thank you. So she's noticing that life for them seems easy and carefree, and she's sort of always getting stuck on things. And she's looking at their thoughts compared what she perceives to be their way of thinking, and compares it to her own and feels inferior. But in the end, she comes to see the beauty in the way that she's made. And I talk in the author's note about how I wanted to sort of uncover the underside of suffering, how sometimes there's beauty on the other side. So in her comparison, it's not like comparing what clothes you have. It's comparing kind of who you are and the way you are. So I'm not sure we can teach kids not to do that. I'm not sure that's healthy or unhealthy. I think it's just natural.
I think you're right. I mean, I think whenever we're talking about, neurodiversity in general with kids, you are looking at like, well, here's how you experience the world. It might not be the same as how others experience the world, but that doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just different. And for everybody to kind of recognize and appreciate those differences, it would probably be doing a disservice to pretend that we're not.
Exactly.
Because that's something that kids are automatically doing. Adults are automatically doing it. And part of actually, I feel like something that is just a really powerful therapeutic aspect to supporting somebody is recognizing that there is a feeling of universality, like that there are other people who experience the world like you do, that you're not alone.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you're the same as everybody else. It is unique to those individuals.
Yeah. And we can't find who we're alike if we're not looking at ourselves thoughtfully.
Talking to kids about mental health needs and neurodivergence is just really important, but it can be pretty hard. Why do you think that it is just so important to have those conversations with kids, even at very young ages?
I think just for the purposes of reducing stigma, at least in my family, I want my daughters to know that they can talk to me. And if not me, then somebody. And helping them to understand that pain doesn't last and they're not alone in whatever pain they have, whether it's temporary or chronic, something simple like hurt feelings or, something more serious like a compulsive behavior. I think the more we can open up those communications with kids, the sooner they can hopefully get help if they need it.
I feel like also there's this aspect to representation in media. Like we recognize how important it is to have diverse voices, diverse authors, diverse characters, so that people can identify with those. But that expands beyond race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, whatever that might be, because mental health and neurodivergence is another piece of that. Like we want to tell stories that not only help people see themselves reflected, but also that help others know what those experiences might be like. And I think those are definitely conversations that we can have with young kids, and picture books are a great modality to do that.
Definitely. Because some kids only experience certain things through books,
Mm-hmm.
A child who goes to the library every week might never go to another country, but he or she can read about it, of course. And same with people's experiences. I think of story as kind of something that helps us to approximate lived experience. And the more we can share that, the more experiences we get to approximately experience.
Yeah. There's so much stress that kids are experiencing these days. I mean, there's so much research about the mental health of kids, and finding ways to help normalize kind of the experience of getting help is really important. And I think, children's literature is one of those ways that we can create opportunities for kids to learn coping skills outside of a therapist's office. What are some of the things that you would hope going forward that we could continue to provide those opportunities for kids?
Certainly books. There's so much that I think we learn from each other. And something that a therapist asked me, and, still does from time to time, it's like, what would you say to a friend who's feeling that way? And it's removing yourself from the situation and trying to look at it objectively. So I might say something to my daughter, like if she's feeling upset, what would you say to your neighbor if she were sad about that, or if she were having trouble with that? Would you be able to help her, do you think? And then help my daughter to reflect on that herself.
Yeah.
And it's kind of that comparison thing again. It's like, and I do it now thinking about like, what would a healthy mind say about the way I'm thinking right now? And I was like, a healthy mind might think that's not really as important as I'm making it. And then you can sort of breathe a little bit better.
Yeah.
Not that I would use the healthy, unhealthy language with children, but just kind of, what's another way of looking at that? Reframing is so helpful.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I like the analogy of what would you say to a friend, or what would you say? Like, I think that that's a good way to kind of reframe that and recognize that often the way that we speak to ourselves is, which might align more with that unhealthy mindset, but that is not really the way that we would address it with other folks, and we deserve that self-compassion, even at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other favorite books or stories that kind of align with what you've written that you would recommend for folks to check out?
Yeah, so I really like the book A Friend for Henry by Jen Bailey and Mika Song. That's about a boy, I believe he's autistic, and he has a very specific idea of what kind of friend he needs and ultimately finds it. And then, let's see, Dark Cloud by Anna Lazowski and Penny Neville Lee. That's about depression and a child who sees her depression as a cloud that goes with her everywhere. There's also Don't Hug Doug, which isn't specifically about neurodivergence, but it's a child who doesn't like to be touched, doesn't like to be hugged. And of course, that's one of the characteristics that we tend to see with children on the autism spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
There's also Too Much, which I haven't read yet, but it's by Jolene Gutierrez and Angel Chang. And that one is about a child who is overwhelmed by just her environment, and sensory processing is sort of the undercurrent of that book.
Yeah, I love that. I think that there's so many good resources out there, and having a good starting place can be helpful for folks. So, Jessica, as we wrap up our conversation today, if you were talking to a child or a teen who's just kind of figuring out that they experience some of these obsessive types of thoughts, and they're kind of struggling and trying to figure out how to handle that overwhelm, what would you say to them? What is it that you would want them to hear?
I would definitely want them to know that they don't have to believe what they're thinking. Just because they think it doesn't mean it's true. And that was something that was really helpful to me when somebody first told me that. It's like, oh, that's true. I don't have to believe that. I can just sort of hear it and react to it, maybe acknowledge it and say, oh, that's interesting, and let it pass.
Yeah, that's such good advice. Jessica Whipple, author of I Think a Lot. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Whether obsessions and compulsions ebb and flow, or if they are a daily life companion, understanding the nature of OCD and how to manage the traits is something that shouldn't be handled solo. Having a community of people, from educators to mental health professionals to parents, and eventually to trustworthy friends, can help to reduce the day-to-day impact of obsessions and compulsions. Sometimes just verbalizing the thought out loud to another person can help to take some of the power away from the fear. For sure, this can feel scary, but it can also be incredibly liberating. Sharing fears and anxieties often reduces their intensity, and support from others provides relief. Building this network takes time, but overall, it makes a huge difference. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Thanks again to Jessica Whipple. If you want more information about her, you can find it in the show notes. One of the best ways to help our podcast grow is to write us a review and give us a positive rating on your podcast platform of choice. Apple invites both reviews and ratings, so if you can take a minute to help us out, we'd really appreciate it. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. Our office manager and social media director is Krista Brown. I'm the executive producer, Dave Morris. For all of us, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance,